What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla Channel, the place where black men can freely express themselves, straight up, no chaser. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla Channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. Please make sure to like the videos, hit the subscribe button, and to share the videos also. So today what I want to do is cover a subject that I've been covering quite often and that is relevant and timely. Ultimately, I'm going to talk about domestic violence, and I'm going to talk about it by means of reading an article written by a man named Augusto Zimmerman. Now, Augusto Zimmerman is an Australian. He's an Australian, okay? But his article is quite good, and I know that if I post it in a link, you probably will not read it. So I'm making it easy for you. You can listen to it as you drive home from work, from your job, right? Or if you're going to work, or if you're going anywhere. If you want to know the data, if you want to know the science behind domestic violence, devoid of any politics or any ideology, from scientists who study it objectively and impartially, you can get it here, okay? Now, who is Augusto Zimmerman? Well, he's a professor of law at Sheridan College in Perth, which is in Australia, right? And he's also a professor of law at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. He's also the president of the Western Australian Legal Theory Association and a former commissioner with the Law Reform Commission of Western Australia. Now, this article appears in a journal or a periodical called Quadrant. It can also be found online, Quadrant Online, okay? I'll post the link to this periodical and this article so you can go look and see for yourself whether or not I'm accurately reading line for line what this man has written, okay? Now, I'll also give you a backdrop about Australia and its relationship with domestic violence policy via feminist policy. Because for the most part, they've just adopted this political stance that domestic violence is something that men do to women in order to establish dominance. But social scientists, they keep telling these people, these ideologues who've been able to influence public policy and law and the judiciary and the police forces, all throughout the entirety of the Western world, they've been able to convince these agencies and these people and these institutions that domestic violence is something that happens to women because men are trying to exert dominance over women. Now, I could see at the outset how this kind of mistake could have been made. But to continue to hold on to this kind of policy when you have social scientists who continuously come out with research that dispels the notion that domestic violence is something that just happens to women because men exerted this so-called dominance over women, to be able to hold on to and maintain it despite evidence to the contrary is intellectually dishonest. And quite frankly, I find it immoral. It's offensive. Because men's lives are being impacted in an adverse way related to this. This is nothing but female chauvinism. And this is why I say men have to get on code. So if you hear me sound angry about this, it's because I am angry about it. You should have righteous indignation when you are in the face of injustice. You should. So anyway, let me just go on and read this article, which is entitled, Women Can Be as Violent as Men. The subtitle of the article is The Truth About Domestic Violence. So if I stumble and trip along the way, don't worry about it. And I will, from time to time, offer my own opinion about what it is that I'm reading. So let me just start off, okay? You may have heard of a Perth-based family counselor who was forced to resign from Relationship Australia, and Western Australia is another letter term that he has listed here, which basically is an acronym, RAWA, okay? So hereafter, I'll be referring to RAWA, Relationships Australia, RAWA. Now, obviously, this is an organization of some kind that exists in Western Australia, okay? So you may have heard of a Perth-based family counselor who was forced to resign from Relationships Australia, RAWA, after posting on his private Facebook page an article social commentator Bettina Arendt wrote a few years ago for Weekend Australian, or for the Weekend Australian. So anyway, this man was forced to resign from his job because he posted an article on his private Facebook page. Private Facebook page. See, this is part of this cancel culture I've been talking about, which is complete and utter bullshit. So if you don't accept an ideology set forth by someone who's established themselves to be in the know, to have politically correct knowledge about some sort of issue related to sexism, to racism, to, anti-Semitism, as soon as you say something that disagrees with the talking points that they've established as politically correct, then they come out for the cancel. But we live in a Western liberal society, right? Where there's freedom of speech, where there's a public sphere where everybody's supposed to be able to participate in it, right? Bullshit. So anyway, the article summarized the latest official statistics and research on domestic violence, providing evidence that most domestic violence is two-way, involving women as well as men. This was regarded as a breach of policy because on its own website, RAWA, which again is Relationships Australia, Western Australia, right? Because on its own website, RAWA says its domestic violence policy, quote, is historically framed by a feminist analysis of gendered power relations, unquote, which, contrary to the international evidence, denies women's role in domestic violence. By endorsing a policy that is so morally bankrupt and punishing a well-respected counselor for refusing to do so, this government-funded institution displays a disturbing lack of compassion for the well-being of all the male victims of domestic violence. RAWA's policy is based on a discredited approach that perpetuates the false assumption that domestic violence is always perpetrated by men against women. And yet, data keeps mounting, which indicate that domestic violence may be perpetrated by both men and women against their partners. A decade ago, an official letter by the Harvard Medical School declared that, quote, the problem is often more complicated and may involve both women and men as perpetrators, unquote. Based on the findings of an analysis of more than 11,000 American men and women aged 18 to 28, the letter concluded, quote, when the violence is one-sided, women were perpetrators about 70% of the time. Men were more likely to be injured in reciprocally violent relationships, 25%, than were women when the violence was one-sided, which is 20%. Let's unpack that. So basically, when women were the perpetrators in one-sided violence, they were 70% of the offenders. You get that shit? Do you understand that? When men don't hit women back, women hit your ass, and they continue to do so. Like it's all good. Like it's a free fire zone. Fuck you. Fuck your safety. Fuck your respectability. Fuck you. Now, if you don't see a problem with this bullshit and how light is being taken in this culture, then fuck you. And I know that's a harsh thing to say, but this is something this is something that is near and dear to me. Because I've been subjected to this bullshit before. And when women continue to do this and there's no sanction from the state and there's no public policy that wants to even explore the research or the data on this issue, they're playing a dangerous game with the lives of men. And they're playing dangerous games with the lives of women. Because at some point, if anybody keeps being subjected to this kind of abuse and this kind of behavior and these kinds of actions, eventually the dog is going to strike back. The dog is going to bite back. So anyway, when the violence is one-sided, women were perpetrators 70% of the time. So men are more likely to be injured in bivalent, violent relationships. What that means is, basically, men are more likely to be injured when they're fighting with their partner, a woman, than are women when the violence is one-sided. So when women get assaulted by men and the violence is one-sided, it's less violent than that of men and women fighting together at the same time. Do you get that? Do you understand that? Do you get it? Let that course through your fucking Abdullah oblongata for a second. Let me hit my goddamn vape stick. Because I'm sick and tired of all the lies, the intellectual dishonesty. I'm just tired of it. At some point, we got to contend with this issue. They're going to keep trying to kick the can down the road because these policies work in behalf of women. It allows women to do what the fuck they want and to exert power over men. This is why it's important to get on code. And I'm not talking about getting on code in relation to lying about it. I'm talking about getting on code with telling the truth about it. There's nothing misogynistic about that at all. It's about truth telling. It's about keeping it real. It's about keeping it 100. If we can't keep it 100, if we got to lie to make women feel good, then fuck that. I don't want to live like that. I'm not gonna act like that. And if people get offended, I don't give a fuck. I don't care. Because I'm pissed off about this shit. That means both men and women agreed that men were not responsible or more responsible than women for intimate partner violence. The findings cannot be explained by men's being ashamed to admit to hitting women because women agreed with men on this point. So let me read that shit one more time and put it together without me, inserting my own commentary. When the violence is one-sided, women were the perpetrators about 70% of the time. Men were more likely to be injured in reciprocally violent relationships, 25%, than were women when the violence was one-sided, which is 20%. That means both men and women agreed that men were not more responsible than women for intimate partner violence. The findings cannot be explained by men's being ashamed to admit hitting women because women agreed with men on this point. So anyway, the Harvard Medical School's letter was based on a seminal work published in the American Journal of Public Health in 2007, written by 4 experts in the field: Daniel J. Whitaker, Tadessis Leelisius, Monica Swan, and Linda S. Saltman. I'm going to include a link to this article in the description of this video. Okay? So the Harvard Medical School letter was based on a seminal work published in the American Journal of Public Health in 2007. It seeks to examine the prevalence of reciprocal, that is, two-way, and non-reciprocal violence, and to determine whether reciprocity is related to violence and injury. After analyzing the data, which contained information about domestic violence reported by 11,370 respondents on 18,761 heterosexual relationships, the following conclusions were reached. A woman's perpetration of domestic violence is the strongest predictor of her being a victim of partner violence. Now let that shit sink into your fucking head for a minute. Let that sink in. Think about that. I don't really see what's fucking puzzling about this. Women who hit men tend to get hit by men. Duh. The strongest predictor that a woman is going to be subjected to domestic violence is when women hit men. But see, right now, there's this fucking gaslighting going on in this culture. And these fucking women gotta know it, man. They can't be fucking oblivious to this shit. I'm not gonna believe that, man. That's like white people basically acting like they don't know. Well, I'm not racist. I don't know anybody around me that's racist. Bullshit. How long do we have to lie about this bullshit? I'm sick of it, man. So that's the first bullet point. A woman's perpetration of domestic violence is the strongest predictor of her being a victim of domestic violence. Among relationships with non-reciprocal violence, women were reported to be the perpetrator in the majority of cases. Women reported greater perpetration of violence than men did, 34.8% against 11.4% respectively, meaning that they reported that they used domestic violence more so than men. And all you got to do is look at the fucking video with the Savage, Meg Thee Stallion. She's laughing about and openly admitting that she was slapping niggas around. He had it coming. I twisted his ass, or, I rapped his ass. This is the kind of culture that is being promoted. And then women, when they actually get hit back, all of a sudden, wah. No, man. No. You got to fucking take responsibility and accountability for this shit. It's time for y'all to start taking accountability for this shit. If you're a woman and you're listening to this, I don't give a fuck about your feelings. It's time for some accountability. You should be feeling feelings of shame. That's what you should be feeling feelings about. Shame. Because of your lack of ability to accept responsibility and for the role that your sex plays in this phenomenon. And ain't no more slipping and sliding back into Victorian womanhood. Fuck that. I'm sick of this shit. I'm sick of y'all not standing up as women and taking what the fuck you put out. You can't put out shit. You can't put out hatred. You can't put out violence. You can't put out viciousness and don't expect for that shit to come back to you. It's called karma. And fuck all that weak. I'm a weak vessel. No, you said you was equal. You said you had power. You said you had magic and all this shit. I'm a woman, hear me roar. Well, if you roaring, motherfucker, you got to back the roar up with some force. The article then goes on to say one explanation for these significant findings is that men are simply less willing than women to report hitting their partner. Then there's a quote. This explanation cannot account for the data, however, as both men and women reported a larger proportion of non-reciprocal violence perpetrated by women than by men. You see it? Because they're reporting about what they're doing, and both men and women are reporting that women are more violent than men. You get it? In fact, the authors explain that women's greater perpetration of violence was reported by both women, female perpetrators equals female perpetrators equals 24.8%, male perpetrators equals 19.2%, and by men, female perpetrators 16.4% and male perpetrators 11.2%. Based on the information available, the authors concluded, our findings that half of relationships with violence could be characterized as reciprocally violent are consistent with prior studies. We are surprised to find, however, that among relationships with non-reciprocal violence, women were perpetrators in the majority of cases, regardless of participant gender. What does that mean? That both women and men are reporting that women are more violent. You get it? Let me go back into it. Our findings that half of relationships with violence could be characterized as reciprocally violent or consistent with prior studies. We are surprised to find, however, that among relationships with non-reciprocal violence, women were the perpetrators in a majority of cases, regardless of participant gender. One possible explanation for this, assuming that men and women are equally likely to initiate physical violence, is that men, who are typically larger and stronger, are less likely to retaliate if struck first by their partner. Thus, some men may be following the norm that men shouldn't hit women when struck first by their partner. Now, you know what that's basically saying? Women are getting passes. Women are not actually being hit back in a majority of cases. Men are allowing women to slap them around like little bitches because they know that they're stronger than them. And they know that they can break their asses off. That's what's happening. That's what's occurring. But I'm just saying, how many times can you feel as if you have unabated to the quarterback, or you can just assault a man again and again and again and again? You see, when a motherfucker hits you once, they'll hit you again. If they'll slap your ass once, they'll slap you again. Then they'll feel like, oh, I was able to get that shit off the first time. I could do this nigga, he'll let me hit him again. Then the author goes on to say, unfortunately, violence by women against men is a phenomenon that has received little attention in the media and in government. Yet for nearly 4 decades, the best research reveals that men are also frequently the targets of violence by female partners. Since the 1980s, more than 200 academic studies have demonstrated that despite the common assertion, most partner violence is mutual, and that a woman's perpetration of violence is the strongest predictor of her being a victim of partner violence. Across several countries, the best research available shows that the percentage of men who are physically assaulted by their female partners tends to be remarkably similar to the percentage of women physically assaulted by their male partners. However, those who deny the empirical evidence often resort to unacceptable tactics, which includes concealing those results, which is a quote, concealing those results, selective citation of research, starting or stating conclusions that are the opposite of the data in the results section, and intimidating researchers who produce results showing gender symmetry. One of the leading researchers in the field, Dr. Murray Strauss, has received numerous death threats, as have his co-researchers, Dr. Richard Gales and Dr. Susan Steinmetz, with the latter the subject of a vicious campaign to deny her academic tenure and rescind her grant funding. So these motherfuckers are receiving death threats for basically publishing data that is objective and impartial about this phenomenon. Now, I'm just going to go out on the record and say this. I wish a motherfucker would try to issue a death threat on me. I'm from the trap. Fuck your intimidation. I wish a motherfucker would. I wish a motherfucker would. But anyway, the article goes on to say, Australian media, and this article is based on Australia, okay? So that's why he's talking about Australia. Australian media and government reports often frame domestic violence merely as violence against women. This generates a totally false assumption that males are always the aggressors, that men are the only ones capable of harming their partners. For instance, you may recall the federal campaign on television 2 years ago. These ads were part of a $30 million campaign designed to help break the cycle of violence against women and their children. It seemed to suggest that all of the perpetrators of domestic violence are males. The prime minister even, he says Caucasian males, actually. But let me say something about that. Because I'm going to tell you this. In the United States, all of this domestic violence policy came to the apex with O.J. Simpson and the death of Anna Nicole Smith. The prototype of the abuser in this culture in America is a black man. And then you got black feminists co-signing this shit that was set up by these white feminists. I've made videos about the Duluth model, but I haven't gone into it intricately and intimately. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. But anyway, let me get back to the article. It seems to suggest that all of the perpetrators of domestic violence are Caucasian males. The Prime Minister even assured us that his domestic violence campaign was all about creating a new culture of respect for women. So they didn't even drink the Kool-Aid. This shit started in America. It's all over the fucking industrialized world, and it is even now being interpolated into the second and the third world. All predicated upon fucking political ideology of some sick motherfuckers in the United States. They got daddy issues. Fuck my daddy. I don't like my daddy. My daddy, my daddy, my daddy. I don't like daddy. Malcolm Turnbull, I'm going back to the article. Malcolm Turnbull, a self-described feminist. Now, this is a man, right? Concomitantly launched a $100 million woman's safety package. Apparently because violence against women in the home is on the rise. So now you got the government spending $30 million. Then you got another cat, obviously balling out of control, wants to show how dedicated he is. It's a fucking white knight, right? Some sort of fucking, imaginary Sir Lancelot or a fucking Galahad. Decides he's going to protect women even more. Which is fucking infantilizing and patriarchal as a motherfucker. And this is the thing that's contradictory about all of this. Is that all of this shit depends upon patriarchy to maintain itself in its entirety to begin with. This shit is supported by patriarchy. And these women are relying upon patriarchy in order to fulfill this so-called egalitarian policy. Or to prevent them from being oppressed. You motherfucking women are going to have to start either one. Being fucking equal and dealing with the ramifications of being equal, or you're going to be dependent upon patriarchy. What the fuck is it? What the fuck is it? Because now you fucking moving back and forward like a fan, oscillating left and right. Pull up the goddamn button on the fan and stick the motherfucker in one position. All this equivocation, this oscillation, all of this fucking, ambiguation, it's about time for that shit to come to a close, man. And men need to get on cold with this. So anyway, he created this safety package with 100 mil because of apparently violence against women is on the rise. In his words, all disrespect for women does not end up with violence against women, but let's be clear, all violence against women begins with disrespecting women. Really? So if a woman is slapping the shit upside your fucking head and has done so on more than one occasion, it's disrespect to slap her ass back? This is the kind of bullshit that this man is caping for pussy is what he's doing. Bottom line, this man is caping for pussy. So fuck him, man. I'm coming out clearly and saying, Mr. Turnbull, fuck you. Fuck you. Anyway, more recently, we have seen further calls to action from Mr. Turnbull to change the hearts of men. And from the opposition leader, Bill Shorten, to change the attitudes of men, as if there was some kind of unspoken bond between these politicians and the men who commit violence against women. Not all disrespect, and this is a quote, not all disrespect of women ends up in violence against women, but that's where all violence against women begins. But what we must do is ensure that we change the hearts and minds of men to respect women. Turnbull says. Shorten says, all this violence is ultimately preventable, and we need to change the attitudes of men. So either these motherfuckers are oblivious, or they just caping for pussy. But men with this kind of stature are not stupid. They're not oblivious. They're not dumb. They're doing what's politically expedient. But in the end, they're not helping out women. Because as was said before, the highest predictor of domestic violence against women is women's domestic violence against men. So you're not helping these women out at all. You helping yourself. You disingenuous motherfuckers. You phony, fake-ass, disingenuous motherfuckers. Turnbull and Shorten. Y'all some disingenuous, fake, phony motherfuckers. Back to the article. And I don't give a damn, man. If you hear me getting upset about this shit, it's because I am. While these political leaders see no problem in offending the Australian people by assuming that violence against women is an accepted part of our society, Claire Lehman, the editor of Quillette, reminds them that in our society, crimes against women are stigmatized and punished harshly. Sexual offenders generally are given lengthy prison sentences and are secluded from other prisoners precisely because the crime is so reviled, even in prison. And yet, in the distorted world of identity politics, and this is a quote, individuality is subsumed into the collective. When one man holds power, he doesn't do so on behalf of himself, he does so on behalf of the male collective. Likewise, when one man commits a murder, collectivists will portray it as being done in the service of all men. This regressive worldview has no qualms about ascribing collective guilt to entire groups of people, but ascribing collective guilt strikes at the very heart of our understanding of justice and liberty. Fucking men. Amen. The actions of one man or a group of men does not signal the entirety of the political will of an entire group of men, let alone one fucking gender or sex. Man, this is some distorted politics. This is some distorted thinking, man, that we're contending with. And I'm telling you right now, if you don't get on code, you are sad, man. Like Boozy said, you sad. You sad, bruh. You sad. He goes on to say, clearly, these two federal leaders believe their statements on this matter will have popular support, particularly from women voters. Bingo! All this shit is posturing and posing so you can get something out of the fucking deal. They don't give a fuck about women. They don't give a shit about these women. Not a single solitary fuck. All they care about is they know that women vote more than men so that they can stroke their fucking egos like Derek Jackson does on the channel where they placate and pontificate to women all goddamn day. All they doing is drawing from your purse strings, you dummies. Stupid asses. But judging from the letters received by journalist and sexologist Bettina Arendt, who wrote an article in The Australian in 2016 about research showing the prominent role women played in violence in the home, there are many in our community, including many women, who are extremely uncomfortable with gender politics. She received an avalanche of supportive letters, not only from professionals working with families at risk from violent mothers, but also from many women who had grown up in such homes, who had witnessed their brothers, fathers, and male friends experiencing violence at the hands of a woman. As she points out, many women commented how surprised they were that Turnbull made such an offensive, one-sided policy announcement. So all of this shit, what's driving all of this is money and politics. The same shit is going on here in America. The same shit. Who is the person who came up with the Violence Against Women's Act? Fucking Joe Biden. The primary author of that shit. You opportunist, disingenuous, racist motherfucker. But he's the lesser of two evils. Fuck Joe Biden. Fuck him, man. And the horse he rode in on. And the horse he rode in on. Anyway, women can be as abusive as men. Professor Linda Mills, the Ellen Goldberg Professor at New York University, is the principal investigator of studies funded by the National Science Foundation and National Institute of Justice, which focus on treatment programs for domestic violence offenders. As she points out, years of research, which mainstream feminism has glossed over or ignored, shows that when it comes to intimate abuse, women are far from powerless and seldom, if ever, just victims. Women are not merely passive prisoners of violent, intimate dynamics. Like men, women are frequently aggressive in intimate settings and therefore may be more accurately referred to as women in abusive relationships, a term I prefer to the more common usages, battered women, victim, or survivor. The studies show not only that women stay in abusive relationships, but also that they are intimately engaged in and part of the dynamic of abuse. As the studies of lesbian violence demonstrate, women are capable of being as violent as men in intimate relationships, and women can be physically violent as well as emotionally abusive. That violence comes out in their intimate relationships both as resistance and as aggression. We need to put aside our preconceptions of gender socialization and roles. Then he goes on to talk about Aaron Pizzey. Aaron Pizzey, the woman who set up the first refuge for battered women in 1971, knew from the very beginning that women can be as violent as men in domestic relations. She herself was raised by a violent mother who used to beat her with an ironing cord until blood ran down her legs. Pizzey strove in vain for her mother's love. She was left badly damaged by her regular beatings and verbal abuse. She was called lazy, useless, and ugly by her mother, who often called her father an oaf and an idiot, and depicted his mother as a prostitute and his father as a common Irish drunk. In Pizzey's own experience, women are just as capable of domestic abuse in both the physical and emotional sense. When she opened a refuge for battered women in England, 62 of the first 100 women to come to the door had been as abusive as the men they had left. So when feminists started demonizing fathers in the early 70s, her own memories were a sober reminder that, and this is quoting from her, women and men are both capable of extraordinary cruelty. We must stop demonizing men and start healing the rift that feminism has created between men and women. This insidious and manipulative philosophy that women are always victims and men are always oppressors can only continue this unspeakable cycle of violence. And it's our children who will suffer. This is the woman who started the domestic violence or the women's shelters. She's the one who started it. This manipulative philosophy, it's insidious to her. It's insidious to me. Look, I'm all for women having equal rights and not being oppressed and dominated. But at the same time, I'm not for this fake ass goddamn ideology which basically puts all men into one category, oppressors, put all women into another category, victims, and then they fucking parcel out justice based upon those ascriptions, which are just ad hoc. They're just ad hoc. That's like saying all black people are niggers and dumb, and all white people are intelligent. You just can't ascribe qualities to one group of people. It's ridiculous, man. Anyway, back to the article. Aaron Pizzey is a part of a growing number of brave experts and scholars trying to set the record straight. As early as the 1980s, academic researchers such as Murray Strauss, a professor of sociology at the University of New Hampshire, have developed research demonstrating that women are just as likely as men to report physical and emotional abuse of a spouse. These findings have been confirmed by more than 200 studies of intimate violence, and they are summed up in Dr. Strauss's article, 30 Years Denying the Evidence of Gender Symmetry and Partner Violence. Now, I've already posted Murray Strauss's videos on the channel. I've posted a bibliography of all of the research demonstrating this, these claims about domestic violence. But we're still stuck in a fucking time warp. Because you got women on the rise calling men oppressors all over the fucking world. I'm sick of this shit, man. This is having a negative and an adverse impact on men's lives. It's fucked up, man. How many more men are going to have to go through this gauntlet predicated upon this bullshit? And your quietude, your non-willingness to speak about it honestly and openly is cowardice. And it's traitorous to your own fucking sex. It's also traitorous to women because those motherfuckers are going to continue to get hurt as well. It's time to face reality. It's time to take the red pill, goddammit. Let's tell the truth. The whole truth. Not part of the truth. The whole truth. Don't be like the devil, only telling half the truth. Keep it 100. Not keep it 99, 98, 97. Keep it 100, man. Anyway, in this article, 30 Years of Denying the Evidence on Gender Symmetry and Partner Violence, in this article, right, it indicates that most partner violence is mutual, and self-defense explains only a small percentage of partner violence by either men or women. Rather than self-defense, the most usual motivations for violence by women, like that of men, are coercion. I'm going to make you do what I want you to do. Anger or punishing behavior by their partner. Let's get that shit straight. The most usual motivations are not self-defense on behalf of women. That's a fucking lie. I'm tired of hearing that motherfucking lie. It's a lie. It's a goddamned lie. It's a lie. It's a motherfucking lie. A lie, 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 lie. Women know it. Men know it. But nobody's really actually talking about the shit in the public. Motherfuckers shaking in their boots scared to get canceled. Fuck that, man. Fuck that. What are the motivations? Coercion, anger, and punishing behavior. Coercion, anger, and punishing behavior. Call it CAP. So that if somebody talks to you about it, you can cite it and reference Murray Strauss. What are the primary motivations for domestic violence? Coercion, anger, and punishing behavior. That's what it is. As Dr. Strauss points out, Pearson reports that 90% of the women she studied assaulted their partner because they were furious, they were jealous, or frustrated, and not because they tried to defend themselves. See, I'm tired of hearing men talk about, well, all she was trying to do was protect herself. And, she had already said that he had snatched her phone and he broke her phone because, and man, get the fuck out of here with that lame ass bullshit. I'm sick of these mangina niggas coming with this bullshit. I'm sick of that, man. Fuck you in that bullshit. I'm tired of hearing that phony ass mangina bullshit. We can tell how this story's going. You can fill in the fucking blanks, man. The woman saw the man with his phone texting the motherfucker. She already is intrusive and controlling as fuck. She probably wanted to know who he was texting. Tried to do a phone check on him. Found out the nigga was texting a motherfucking woman. I'm talking about the Meg Stallion situation. Then she went ham. She started acting a fucking fool in public because she was jealous, angry, frustrated. Based upon the data we've just heard, what do you think is the more likely case? That the man just slapped the shit out of a woman, she didn't do what I like. I'm just going to slap the shit out of her. Men are taught from the earliest of ages not to do that. The very outset of their lives. As toddlers. Don't hit her. Don't you ever touch her. We're already taught that shit. But women are not taught it at all. Now you got a whole bunch of them walking around like they tough as a motherfucker. Like they John Gotti or something. Like they can go burn cars up, shoot motherfuckers, slap them, punch them. No repercussions whatsoever. No consequences. But I'm equal though. But I'm magic though. That's some magical shit, ain't it? That is magical. It's some black magic. And I ain't talking about black in the positive sense. I'm talking about hellspawn kind of magic. Anyway, let me read this shit again, man. Pearson reports that 90% of women she studied assaulted their partner because they were furious, they were jealous or frustrated, and not because they tried to defend themselves. These motives are parallel to the motivations of male perpetrators. Research on homicides by women shows similar results. For example, Jurek and Gregoire studied 24 women perpetrated homicides and found that 60% had a previous criminal record. 60% had initiated use of physical force, and 21% of the homicides were in response to prior abuse or threat of abuse, death. A larger study by Felsen and Metzner, drawing upon 2,058 partner homicide cases, determined that 46% of the women perpetrators had been previously abused, but less than 10% had acted in self-defense. In other words, all this self-defense bullshit is a lie. It may happen in some cases, but the cases are so minimal as to be negligible. Women are slapping, punching, biting, kicking men because of cap. Coercion, anger, and punishment. Cap. Remember the shit. In the United States, estimates from National Family Violence Surveys show that within a given year, at least 12% of men are the targets of some sort of physical aggression from their female partners, with 4% of these men suffering severe violence. That's over 2.5 million men in the U.S. We know a large number of those men are African American men, black men. In another pioneering study in America, the clinical sample found the eruption of conjugal violence occurs with equal frequency among both husbands and wives. This study included several statements by women who often abused their husbands. I probably had no reason to get angry with him, but it was such a bore. I was trying to wake him up, you know. He was such a rotten lover anyway. So I'd yell at him and hit him to stir him up, said one woman. Can you imagine the fucking nuts? The gall? I mean, the fucking nerve. In Britain, female domestic violence against men is clearly on the rise. Data from Home Office statistical bulletins and the British Crime Survey revealed that men made up of about 40% of domestic violence victims each year. 17 men were killed by their female partners in England in 2012 alone. Furthermore, British men are twice as likely as women to keep their abuse undisclosed, primarily because of cultural barriers and a legal system that does not protect them. They feel emasculated. Their pride is undermined. They are reluctant to see themselves as victims, says Mark Brooks, the chairman of Mankind, a charity for male victims of domestic violence. Even so, every year, our helpline is seeing at least a 25% increase in the number of men seeking help. Of course, the percentage of reported male victims would be considerably higher were it not for the sexist biases of the system. As noted by a journalist in The Guardian, men assaulted by their wives and girlfriends are often completely ignored by the police. They are often treated as second-class victims, and many police forces do not take them seriously. Male victims are almost invisible to the authorities, such as the police, who rarely can be prevailed upon to take the man's side. Says John Mays of Parity, an organization that advocates equal treatment of domestic violence victims, both male and female, and their children. Their plight is largely overlooked by the media in official reports and in government policy. For example, in the provision of refuge places, 7,500 refuge places for females in England, but only 60 for men. The same can be said of here in America. The same can be said. Look here, man. This is part one of this. I'm going to finish out the last paragraph of this, and then I'll conclude with this on another day, because I'm getting tired. I'm getting emotionally spent thinking about this shit. I really and truly am. The UK figures notoriously underestimates the true number of male victims of domestic violence. This is so because men in Britain are extremely reluctant to disclose that they have been abused by women. Culturally, it is still enormously difficult for men to bring these incidents to the attention of the authorities. It certainly does not fit the false narrative that women are supposed to be always weak and never the perpetrators of domestic violence. But it is patently clear that both men and women can be victims of such violence, and that men feel under some immense pressure to keep up the pretense that everything is okay. As for Australia, The Australian Bureau of Statistics Personal Safety Survey reveals that proportions of non-physical abuse, for example, emotional abuse, against men have risen dramatically over the last decade, with 33% of all people who reported violence by a domestic partner being male. And yet, one of the tactics used by domestic violence campaigners is to highlight only men's violence and leave out any statistics relating to women. There is constant pressure to present domestic violence as a male problem and to place all of the blame for such violence on men as a collective group. As a result, and based on a theory that addresses the problem essentially as a male problem, male victims are often met with disbelief, even suspicion, when they seek protection from a violent partner. Anyway, man, again, I'm going to come in with the follow-up to this. But it's necessary to go through this because some of y'all don't know the fucking data. Apparently, even though you're listening to the videos, you have the tendency to think that I'm trying to put forth something that's misogynistic when in actuality, all I'm trying to do is bear out the fucking truth. Green Gorilla Channel, man, I'm out this bitch.